But anyway, these planes were coming in and landing, and people were getting in there out, and they'd walk by, and I'd say, "Are you Lyle?" And they said, "No, I'm not Lyle." I said, "Oh, okay." And this happened 2 or 3 times, and finally this plane landed, and this guy got out with his ponytail, and I said, "That's got to be him. You know, he's got to be one of us. He just looks the part." For what short time I've been able to visit with he and his wife both, God, they're lovely people, and I can't wait to hear his story. So I'm going to ask him to come on up, Lyle.
Good evening. My name is Lyle, and I am an alcoholic. I love coming to these things. I don't like coming up to the podium, but I do like coming to the conventions. You know, Hank picked us up out there, and you know, in just that brief period of time of talking and coming back, and I thought, you know, I am so blessed and so privileged and so honored to be able to hang out with people like Hank. You know, the essence of the folks that I see and get to be with are gentle and kind and honest and sincere and giving. And I thought, you know, I have a hard time sometimes visualizing the people that I get to hang out with as being down and out drunks at any point in time in their life. And I'm just incredibly grateful to be part of this fellowship, and I certainly didn't always feel that way. I want to say thanks to Joe for all of his accommodations, and I've been up and down and back and forth on this thing because I scheduled 2 events unknowingly this weekend, which created a little bit of a problem. I was going to drop the other one, and Joe said, no, we can work this out. And because my first obligation was to Alcoholics Anonymous, that's where I had made the promise, and so that's what I was going to do. So I want to apologize up front for the fact that I came in today. I'm going to leave tomorrow. I just never do that. That's just not my style. I go to these things, and I get there usually early, and I hang out and get to visit and fellowship with folks, and then I stay until the last speaker's over. I'm there for every speaker. Love to hear the Al-Anons when they're on the program, and that's where the meat and potatoes of these things is for me. It's out there. It's not up here. And because of the scheduling conflict, Barbara and I are going to get out of here fairly early in the morning, and I want to apologize to you for that, for not spending the rest of the weekend here with you. Got to see some friends from conventions past. Bodie and Bill C. are here, and some other folks have come up and that I've gotten to visit with, and those are always heartwarming moments. Somebody says, "Oh, I heard you here and I heard you there." I go, "God, what are you doing here? Why don't you go shopping? You know, do something." Unless this is just another one of these deals where they want to see if I'm still telling the truth. But anyway, I need to get into this. I am, for the benefit of you folks and also for the taper, James, who I just dearly love. James has taped me, I don't know, 6 or 8 times. I keep expecting to look over there and see him Z'd out with his head down asleep with his tape machine. But I have a timer up here. That's the good news. The bad news is it was the last remaining one at Walmart, and so it's a 3-hour deal. Not so. It's got big numbers, and I can see it, and so I'll try to be appropriate. A couple of things that I need to get out of the way, I guess, early on, and that is that I don't do in the interest of time, I have to really kind of hustle. I still, in the period of time that I'll be up here, which will probably be an hour and 5 minutes, somewhere close to that, I'm going to leave out 70-80% of the story because I don't have time to cover the parts, and there's an awful lot to it. A lot of miracles that I just simply don't have time to expand on. I also don't do a drunk-a-log, a big one, in the interest of time, and I think that it's important, real important, that I do enough of one where you connect to and relate to me and understand that I am an alcoholic. I don't feel like I have to come up here and prove it, but I still think that I need to talk a little bit about it, and I just don't have time to get into a whole lot of it. You know, I did everything that you did. I had blackouts. I woke up places I didn't know where I was or how I got there. I lost cars. Got into some scrapes in the bars. Had 2 DUIs spread out over some period of time. And I see Scott is here, and he's talking tomorrow, and you want to be sure and hear him. He brought back some memories. He and I were on a program quite some while back, but I loved it because he kept talking about how, well, this could just happen to anybody. And it brought back that idea to me that I had done that all the time. That was always my staunch fallback position. Well, you know, okay, it can happen to anybody. It can happen to anybody. And then, of course, after I got sober, I looked at it and I thought, well, it could happen to anybody. But all of those things couldn't happen to one person. And so I just don't have time to go into a whole lot of blood and guts drunkalogue. One of the other things that I do is I talk about what I did as a profession. And I hear people periodically, I don't know where the rule book is on this, I haven't found it in the big book, but I hear people say, oh, you don't know that from the podium. Well, I do talk about it from the podium because it has a direct bearing on the fallout, the consequences, and this huge media blast that occurred as a result of what I did. It also had everything to do with the fact that what I did constituted a federal felony crime. Had I been in another line of work, nobody would have known, and it wouldn't have been a big deal. So I talk about it, and I'll be talking about the fact that I was an airline pilot. And having said that, I need to also make very clear that I don't believe there's any prestige or status in this fellowship based on what we did or do or anything else. I don't care if you live on a home on the hill or you live under the bridge, or you're an airline pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, or you work in an assembly line, or you're unemployed. I just don't think it makes any difference. I think we all come here for one purpose only, and that is to get sober. And that's all I've ever asked for. That's all I've ever wished for. That's all I ever hoped for. And I've been blessed beyond my wildest dreams about that particular part of it. So when I talk about this, I need you to understand that I'm not an airline pilot who was a drunk. I was a drunk who just had some very serious good fortune, was able to fly airplanes for a living, and that's the only connection that has to the story. I'm supposed to talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. So let me tell you that my sobriety date is March the 7th. I just celebrated 15 years, and nobody's more in awe of that than I am. There was a period of time when I looked at my drinking and my sobriety, and there was a certain element of grandiosity involved in that, because I thought, you know, I don't know any alcoholic anywhere ever who loved to drink as much as I did. And I believed that for just a brief period of time. And I thought, God, of all the billions and millions and billions of alcoholics that have traipsed through the earth, that's a pretty grandiose idea. And then I said, well, I don't know any that like to drink any more than I did. And then finally I said, who cares? I just like to drink a lot. And I thoroughly, totally, absolutely, 100% enjoy my sobriety. I'm retired now, and I don't have any outside leverage. It's to be exerted on me. I just love being sober. I love being in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I love being with you folks. I love the complete sincerity, the lack of pretense that goes with this fellowship and these events. And I am deeply appreciative of all the folks who do all the work that allow us to come together and enjoy an evening like that. Now, what I'm probably going to do is mix up the, as Joe was saying, Hank was saying, I flew myself in here today, partially because I wanted to make sure I had a sober pilot, and I felt reasonably sure that might occur. There have been a number of things in the news over the course of the last couple of years, and they are causing an ever-decreasing splash in the media. When they find a drunk airline pilot, it's getting less and less driven by the media. But of course, a couple of years ago, the America West thing, those two fellows was all over the news, and then there have been more since then. Back on March the 7th of 1990, I was on a layover and went into a place called the Speakeasy Bar in Fargo, North Dakota, of which I only have a spotty memory of it. And that's where I had my last series of drinks. I've often wondered what it might have felt like if I had been able to know that afternoon as I walked in there that I was getting ready to have my last drinking session. I wonder what that would have felt like. I got asked to go back there several years ago, and I went back to that bar. And as a matter of fact, a guy had called me from Fargo, and he said, "My name is David so-and-so. I'm an attorney in Fargo up here." And my first instant thought was, my God Almighty, I thought the statute of limitations must have run by now. And he said, "I'm a friend of Bill W." So I went back up there, and I asked him, I said, "Is the Speakeasy Bar still in business?" He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "I'd like to go by and see that place." And he said, "Well, we can go back there and we can go by and have lunch." He said, they got great lunches. I didn't even know they served food. So anyway, I got to return to the scene of the crime, literally, and sit in that place and look around a little bit. But on March the 7th, I had my last series of drinks. On March the 8th, early in the morning, I had drank pretty late that night. All three of us, three pilots, had done that. And there had been some problems in the bar that drew some attention to us. But the next morning, I got up, suited up, and I flew a Boeing 727 with 58 passengers from Fargo, North Dakota, to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. And when I walked off the airplane in uniform, I immediately walked into a crowd of people. And I knew when I looked and saw these folks that life as I had known it for about 51 years was over. I saw some airport police. I saw FAA officials in the mix, and I saw Northwest Airlines company officials there. And I deliberately do not leave the airline anonymous for reasons I hope you'll pick up on as I go through the story. But at that point in time, Northwest Airlines was the only major carrier that did not have a program for alcoholic pilots. All the other major carriers had outstanding, superb programs for alcoholic pilots. But Northwest did not. And I had seen over the course of almost 22 years, I had seen guys get in trouble drinking, and the outcome was always the same. It was instant, and it was fatal, and it was irreversible. And they were fired, there was no appeal, and they never came back. It was career-ending immediately. And so I knew that that was going to be the consequence that I was going to be dealing with. And we were kept for about 12 hours that day, and the day was very much a blur. It was surreal. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I thought I had lived a pretty honorable, productive life. I never expected to watch things end this way. And so I had moments during that day when I was kind of in and out of body, when I felt like I was watching this from someplace distant as it took place, and then I would have these other flashback moments, these sudden transformation moments where I would sit there and I'd look around and go, my God Almighty, this is happening to me. It is actually happening. It's real. It's happening to me right now. And we, at the end of the 12 hours, we had given sworn statements to Northwest Airlines attorneys. We had talked to Airline Pilot Association attorneys. It was a devastating, emotionally shredding nightmare, and my mind was just absolutely devastated. I couldn't function. I was having difficulty just realizing what was going on. And at the end of the day, it was dark again, and we were driven back by an assistant chief pilot, the three of us. It was deadly silent inside the car, and it was dark outside like it is right now. And I remember looking outside, and I remember the thought hitting me that this is absolutely representative of my life, that the light has extinguished, never to be there again. I will never, ever live life again as I had up to that point. And I thought I'd had a pretty good life. I really thought I'd had a pretty good life. I got to my commuter apartment, and I was just gut sick and heart sick. And I went in and tried to call Barbara, and I had forgotten that I was supposed to be home that night. I found out later that she had waited for me for some 4 hours at the Atlanta airport for me to come in, and finally came home. And when I called, she was still at the airport, and the answering machine picked up, and I just really didn't know what to say or how to get it out. I was just stumped. And I got some brief message out, whispered, sort of, and I said, there's been a disaster, and I think I've lost my job, and I'll be in on the first flight in the morning. And I did that. I spent what I thought was probably a totally sleepless night, and although I'm sure I must have dozed. But I got up the next morning, and I put a uniform on, and I walked to through the Minneapolis-St. Paul terminal to take the flight home. And the instant overwhelming feeling that I recall that blunted and blocked out all other feelings almost exclusively was one of shame. I was just so ashamed. Just so ashamed. And every time someone glanced my way as I walked through that terminal the next morning, I just flinched. I felt like I was taking a blow, because I knew they knew, or they were going to know very shortly, what I had just done. And I think one of the things that made the shame so extreme was that I had not lived like that. I had been taught, and I had always tried to reflect honor and pride and dignity on whatever it was I was doing, whether I was putting on a Marine Corps uniform, or whether I was representing my heritage, my family, my profession, my airline, whatever it was, I always tried to do it to the best of my ability, with the idea that I should make it shine, that I should bring some honor and dignity to that. And now I'm in a situation where I have absolutely plunged to the deepest depths of the extreme opposite, where I had brought shame and disgrace on virtually everything that I held dear and treasured. And I was having a horrible, horrible, horrible time trying to accept that and just adjust to it and just to deal with it in these first few hours. And it was only going to get worse as the days went on. It was going to get exponentially worse. I got to the Atlanta airport, and now I've never told this story, but what I didn't say, that I made my way to the front of the airport as quickly as I could. I didn't want anybody to see me or stop me. I knew a lot of people there. And I saw the car. I saw Barbara parked out by the curb. And as I went to get in the car, I felt like I had to absolutely climb over the curb to get in the car with her. And I couldn't even look at her. I could not turn to even meet her gaze. And all I could say was, "Honey, I'm so sorry." And she pulled away from the curb, and she's from South Texas, and she has this soft South Texas accent. And she said, "Who better than I can possibly understand how you feel right now?" And it's my recollection that we drove home in silence. I didn't want to talk about anything. And I went in the house when we got there, and she left. She went to work. I went in, and it was just silent. It was like a tomb inside that house. And I went over and I picked the phone up and I called a doctor who was not a medical doctor. He was a PhD type doctor. He was the only doctor I knew at the time. He was a family therapist. And I said to him that I'd had an emergency situation occur and that I had to come in and see him immediately. And within about an hour, I was in his office. And quite often, I will say from the podium, and it's true, that every time I stand here, I watch this whole video take place over and over and over as I go through this story. And so I very clearly watch this and see the pictures in my mind, and it's very clear to me. And I remember the look on his face, and the look of shock and surprise. I remember him shaking his head and walked around the side of the desk, and he said, "God, Lyle," he said, "this is horrible. This is just horrible." And then as kind of an afterthought, and something that I didn't understand, it was going to be one of several comments I wouldn't understand that day, he said, shook his head again, he said, "But maybe this is what had to happen." And I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. He left and he came back a few minutes later and he says, "I have just called a doctor." He said he's quite prominent in Atlanta, and he said he's a psychiatrist. He said he's a recovering alcoholic and cocaine addict, and he said he's certified in addiction medicine. I'd never heard of that. I had never heard of addiction medicine. Now, this is now Friday, March the 9th, and he said, "You have an appointment to see him at 6 o'clock tonight." Now, that struck me as being as something very telling, that I didn't know doctors who saw patients at 6 o'clock on Friday evenings, especially prominent doctors. And so I assumed that they were taking this very seriously. And later there was a psychiatrist in the audience, and he said, "You know why they did that?" And I said, "No." He said, "Because somebody thought you were close to suicide." And I said, I thought about that, and I thought, somebody was reading me very closely. Somebody was really reading, because I was absolutely shredded. Barbara and I drove over there that evening. He went in, turned the lights on. She stayed out in the waiting room, and I walked in. I have no memory or recollection of that meeting with that doctor, except to say that I was there. I know that I was physically present, but I don't know how long I was in there with that man. I don't know if it was 5 minutes or an hour and 5 minutes. I don't remember the first thing he asked me. I'm sure he asked me a number of questions, but I can't remember anything about that. I have two things that I do remember that struck me as significant as of that meeting. And one of them was, at some point, wherever it was, he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Lyle, you're an alcoholic and you need to go into treatment tonight." And the second thing that I found of significance was that nothing happened when he said that. And the reason that I find that meaningful is because I have hated the word alcoholic since I first knew what it meant. I've hated it since I had seen people and had pictures in my mind of who they were and what they were. My parents were two of them. I hated the things they did. I hated their actions. I hated the consequences that took place inside the family. I had seen drunk Indian people when I would powwow all over Oklahoma in the summertime. I would always be ashamed and embarrassed and disgraced and say I would never be like that. So I had a picture in my mind of what an alcoholic was. They were life's losers. They were people that were 1,000,000 miles removed from me. And he's telling me that I'm an alcoholic, that I need to go into treatment right now. I looked at him and I said, "I thought you would probably tell me that." I said, I don't mind doing that, but I said, I just got home tonight. I said, I'd really like to just, please. I said, and I was kind of begging him. I said, please, just let me go home. Let Barbara pull the drapes and hang on to me. Just let my mind uncoil. Let me just please absorb what's happened, and then I'll go in first thing Monday. He said, you need to go into treatment tonight. And I paused just momentarily, and I thought, why would I come over here if I'm not going to do what this man's telling me to do now? And I looked at him, I said, okay. So I look at it as my first lesson in willingness that evening. So we got in the car and we followed his directions clear back across Atlanta to a treatment center that I'd never heard of, naturally. And then we drove back in the dark, and I remember the final turn, and the headlights hit this sign that's no longer there. I just spoke there the other night, and I thought to myself as I made this very same turn the other night, how different it feels today when I make that turn and I go down that hill. But I can tell you that that first night in the dark, those headlights hit that sign, and I stopped. I put my foot on the brake, and I stopped with the lights on the sign, and it said Anchor Hospital, a hospital for alcoholism and other chemical dependencies. And I sat there, and it was like somebody had just hit me in the gut. And I thought, my God Almighty, this is how my life ends at age 51 in a treatment center for alcoholics. And I could not have felt more ashamed or defeated. I was absolutely defeated. And I said to Barbara, as we moved on down the hill, and March the 9th just happened to be my 27th wedding anniversary, and I said, hell of a way to spend an anniversary, huh? And she made one of those statements that I could not even remotely begin to process, and she said, very softly, she said, might be the best one we ever had. And I thought, who could possibly think that at a moment like this? And I didn't even try to respond to it. I drove down the hill and went into the treatment center. And I'm going to stop and kind of go back and catch up as quickly as I can and fill in the time prior to then. I said one time I'll try to make a mental note of where I am, and I thought I don't have anything to write on. And I don't know if this is my water or not, but I'm taking it. It's vodka. No, just kidding. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding. But I was born in September 1938 in Wichita, Kansas, which makes me 66. Sometimes I play math games with the group and tell you that I'm 73 and see who's really thinking or doing the math. And it bothers me when they nod their head, yeah, like, well, yeah, it makes sense to me. So anyway, I'm 66. And I was born into a blue-collar family with two very good people as parents. Sadly, they were both alcoholics. We were poor in that we didn't have a lot. And my final growing up years was on the edge of Wichita on a World War II housing project called Plainview, Kansas. I remember being pretty happy as a kid. And then the other thing that's kind of strange is that I don't have a lot of memory of alcohol in the family until all of a sudden there's a cutoff point, and that's all I remember. And I know it didn't occur like that, but that's my perception. That's the way I recall it. Not a problem until all of a sudden, and then it was a problem constantly. There was a Native American community in that small area that I was a part of, and ethnically I'm a mix of several things, and notably Irish and Comanche, which makes for a real interesting drinking combination. If you like, pour a little whiskey on that combo. And I told people, I said, when I was really getting smashed, my idea of a good time, preferably, was to find a good Irish bar and sit there and listen to if they got a band, Irish band. I knew where they all were on the layovers, and listen to those Irish freedom songs. I knew all of them by word. That was my first choice, and if I couldn't do that, then I'd just get drunk and go out and kill some white people. And I would usually lose most of my friends at option number 2. But it really got interesting in some of the cowboy bars in Montana. But created a lot of cultural chaos in my family when I was young, because I had always wanted to be a cowboy and then found out I was Indian. But when I was 14, the booze had really ripped the family good, and my parents got their first divorce. And by the time that I graduated from high school, or shortly thereafter, each of them had been married and divorced 2 more times. And I had a lot of problems with step-parents and step-siblings, and I didn't like them, and they didn't like me. And and I had a lot of anger. I seem to recall, really, I had two emotions. I was either laughing a lot or I was really angry. And I don't remember much in the way of middle ground in that area. I goofed off in high school because nobody paid any attention. I was a pretty good student when I applied myself, but I squandered a lot of opportunities there because nobody cared, and I took advantage of it. I graduated when I was 17 and had decided to go into the service. And most of my friends from that particular area, very few of them ever went to college, coming from the area I came from. And most of them married their 18-year-old high school sweethearts. And Wichita, as some of you may or may not know, is called the air capital of the world. And there's Boeing Beach and Cessna are there. And there were a couple of two or three more little smaller aircraft factories there at the time. And so the general rule was they married their sweetheart and went to work in one of the aircraft factories. I had decided to join the service, and this is in 1956. And a few months after I graduated, I turned 18. And wasn't sure what I was going to do, and one of my friends had come home from the Marine Corps, and he and I hooked up and went to a bar, and I sat there, I must have been for 2 or 3 hours as I listened to this guy just completely regale me, just nonstop, with stories about what Marine drill instructors do to their recruits, this horrible masochistic treatment that they receive in boot camp. And I've looked at that and thought back on it and thought, I probably had a brief opportunity to alter the course of my life at that juncture if I had sought some professional help, because I thought I just couldn't wait to run down and sign up and see if I could go try that. So I did, and I head for Marine boot camp. And I hear a lot of speakers talk about how they never fit in anywhere. They just never fit. And I believe that. I believe that's their experience, but that's not my experience. And once I got there and I got snapped into the routine, I really loved it. It was tough and structured, and the camaraderie was just beyond description. And it was something that I really began to feel like I was actually a part of, and I was right in the middle of it. I had no intention of trying to excel anywhere along the way. I just wanted to survive. I just wanted to get through the 13 weeks. I just wanted to be just kind of in the middle of the group. And to my surprise, when graduation came, they gave out 2 or 3 pairs of PFC stripes to the top guys, and I got a pair of those stripes. And I was just, I had never been a standout before, and I was just extraordinarily proud of that. And so we go to Camp Pendleton for combat training. I'm drinking like the rest of them, but we can only drink aboard the base because of our age. My drinking isn't, I was not one of those people who instantly drank and said, man, I'm an alcoholic. It took me a while to really bloom and blossom. And I was drinking, but just he couldn't pick me out of the crowd. And I remember getting to Pendleton, and one night it was raining, and I was inside. I remember this moment. And I was, because of my advanced rank with these 2 little stripes on my sleeve and my buddies being slick sleeves, I was inside as acting corporal of the guard, and they were outside walking a post in the rain. And I'm thinking to myself, I may have a really good career here because of the rate I'm moving up. General can't be too far away. And I really felt I fell into a home there. I loved the Marine Corps. I really found my niche there. And so about 4.5 years later, I came walking in, and they said, there's a new program out called Marine Aviation Cadet. You're the only guy in the unit whose scores are high enough to qualify for that program. I had no idea how those scores got there. I knew they were there, but I had no idea how they had gotten there. And I gave it some thought. Part of it scared me. I was one of those kids that always wanted to fly. I built little stick airplanes and hung them from my ceiling in my rooms. But flying was a dream that was off in some other area of the world for me. I mean, people like me who come out of the places that I came from don't do that. That's for people who have money and privilege and prestige and education and college and all of those things. And so that was really not something that I had considered a possibility for myself. And then they told me that roughly half are going to wash out somewhere around in there. and that very few will be able to test out as an enlisted Marine, as I was going to be able to do. Most of them are coming in from the street and got to have all of that college, 2 years minimum, and those were the guys I was going to be competing with. And so because I knew, I could think enough to know that statistically I was on the high probability of not making it based on my education and the people that I was mixing with. And I don't like to fail. I just don't like to fail. I had considered it and wrestled with it and finally decided that I would take the chance and go for it. I went home to Wichita about that time, and there was a powwow, and I went to it and danced, and they had a special for me because I was leaving on this big adventure. And I remember being really impacted by that experience. It was not a big deal powwow-wise, but it was a big deal to me. And I remember thinking all the way to Pensacola, I can't fail, I can't wash out. If I can't go home to this Indian community as a failure, because I am the only guy there who has this opportunity, that has this chance to get a set of gold wings, to get a set of gold bars if I'm successful at the end of 18 months. So I launched into this process driven by fear of failure, and just wanted to just complete. I just wanted to get through. And there are 4 phases to that process, and every one of those phases I ended up right at the top of my class. And the first couple of times I was convinced it was administrative failure. Somebody had jumbled the numbers. Couldn't be true. And I never gathered any momentum as far as confidence was concerned. I was drinking more and more and more at this point, but we all were. So again, I was not a standout in that particular bar crowd. I was just staying up with them, not having any problem staying up. It was part of the persona. I mean, we were learning early on that if we're going to be a fighter pilot, we had to play hard, drink hard. There's a profile that goes with that. And so we had to live up to that, and I wasn't having any difficulty at that point in time. In the final phase of flight training, I left the Florida area and went to Texas, a little town called Beeville, Texas, Naval Air Station, for advanced jet flight training. About 6 months to go before I got my wings. And my first night into town, I hooked up with a bunch of buddies that had gotten separated from, and we went to the officers club, and we just got ripped. And we were having a good time, really having a good time. I was glad to see them. They were glad to see me. And they said, let's go into town. There's a old-fashioned drive-in in town here. And there's a lot of good-looking South Texas girls. And they kind of like us cadets. Now, we were down on the low rung of the social ladder of the people going through flight training. We were the rough-cut, uncouth. We made $150 or something like that a month. All the other people were smooth and polished, and they were making a lot more money. But for some reason, a lot of the gals found the cadets more fun. And also, we had that marrying potential because we were going to be officers pretty quick. So we went into this drive-in. I was pretty smashed. And I've never been real gutsy with the ladies, and so I was kind of hanging back, and I was watching my buddies as they went up to this car full of girls, and they were talking to them. But I noticed the driver wasn't talking to anybody. And finally, I thought I'd had enough to drink. I had rehearsed 2 or 3 really neat things to say that I was just sure would just knock her off her feet and dazzle her. And I played them back several times. I said, I'm ready. I walked up there to her. I leaned down, and she turned and looked at me. And the minute she did, everything evaporated. And it was all gone. I didn't know what I was going to say. And I'm sure I slurred something out. I remember saying something like, "You got the prettiest brown eyes I've ever seen." And she was duly impressed. And she looked at me. I looked at her, and I thought, God, I feel like such an ass. I just really would like to have rewound that tape and backed myself up there. So I just turned around and walked away. And I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I stood back there and thought, well, I'll drink some more. And I was standing back where I could see the car. And a little while later, she got out to go in to the ladies' room. And I remember getting an eyeful of that. And I was where I could really see her. And I thought, my God, turquoise shorts, cute butt, nice legs, and brown eyes. A lot more than I had on my list. And and I didn't realize it at the time, but I truly had an AA thought at that moment, and I wouldn't recognize it for about 29 more years. But I watched her walk in there for a good while, and I thought, you know, I want what she has, and I'm willing to go to any length to get it. And I did. Ran into her accidentally the next day, and I was sober and bought her a cup of coffee and was able to talk with her, and she said that I could call her, and we began to date. And she, on February the 25th of 1963, her 20th birthday, she pinned my gold bars and my gold wings on me. And this past March the 9th, we just celebrated 42 years together. I'd like to ask her to stand up. I tried to assume some credit that wasn't due me one time when she was in the audience, and I said, I'm not one of those alcoholics that speaks of marriage in multiples, thinking that it was kind of funny, and there was absolutely no reaction to it. And afterwards, she said to me, you know when you said that? And I said, yeah. And she said, I just want you to know one thing, it's sure as hell not your fault. And I never considered her a master of the one-liner, but I didn't respond, and she followed it by saying, as a matter of fact, the only reason I stayed married to you is because I couldn't stand to admit I'd made a mistake. And but she did stay with me. She and I launch off. We launch off into this thing. I go out to California and join a Marine squadron, and she joins me out there. And it's one of the finest groups of people I've ever been with, and we still have our get-togethers every 2 years, and my drinking has really shot up at this point. But again, I've got the money, the time, the opportunity to drink, and you can't pull me out of the crowd. I would virtually be the last guy at the officers' club on Friday night if I wasn't flying. I'd be the last guy. He and I'd be locking the door. And the next morning I'd be up bright and early. It just wasn't affecting me. And I'd be washing the car, cutting the grass, doing all kinds of stuff. Wasn't having any problems. It wasn't interfering with my flying. I was only doing this mostly on the weekends, and I was just one of the guys, just part of the crowd. And she and I instantly had 2 little babies, 8 days less than a year apart. And I'm here to tell you, you do not have to be a Catholic to do that. And I got so tired of people asking me that. You know, if you're just a couple of young, horny Protestants and birth control isn't real good, then it's not a big challenge. And so about that time, I headed for Vietnam with this group. I was living the perfect life. My dreams couldn't have come true in a better way. I was a young jet pilot with a good reputation as an aviator. I was a good officer, and I had a good reputation. I had this beautiful wife and these 2 little babies. Life, it couldn't have been any better. I couldn't have painted a picture that would have made me any happier than that did. So I head for Vietnam. We were the first jet squadrons into Vietnam, flying off of little aluminum planking airstrip. It was very challenging flying. I was with 20 of the finest aviators I've ever been with, and flew a number of missions over there. We all did. And I came back 13 months later, and I had some decorations. I had picked up a regular commission over there. They were very competitive at that time. I thought there's no way they'll ever give one of those to a high school graduate. Never give one to a high school graduate. And I was one of 3 guys that got one over there. So I was doing well. I came back, but I had decided finally to get out of the Marine Corps because I had projected out all the family separation that was going to be required. And I had told Barbara from day one, we're not going to have a family like the one I grew up in. We're going to have a family that is safe and locked in and solid and stable and secure. These kids are going to be loved, and they're going to have a parent there all the time, and I want you to be a stay-at-home mom. I don't care what our finances are. And that's what she had done. And she was a great mom. And I came back, and I made the very painful, anguished decision to get out of the Marine Corps. And I mean, it was a heartbreaking decision for me to do that. I sat down and I wrote my letter of resignation, and 2 weeks after it was accepted, I was in class at Northwest Airlines. And for nearly 22 years at Northwest Airlines, I had about the same kind of reputation I'd had in the Marine Corps. I had been taught. I think it's important to understand that even though my parents died from this disease, and they died horrible deaths, my dad in particular, and I saw things that we all see in our families, where alcoholism is rampant with one or both parents. They weren't drunk all the time, and I owe them a debt, because when they were not drunk, they were great parents, and they taught me a lot of good things. They were hard workers and almost worked themselves to death, and so I developed a hard work ethic based on the personal example they set. They taught me to be honest, and they taught me a lot of good things. So even though I've got a lot of bad memories and a lot of really grim, nasty memories of the later years, I have to understand and realize and recognize that they weren't drunk all the time, and I owe them a debt. So for 22 years, we persevered there at Northwest. Right after we got to Northwest, we adopted a little Chippewa Indian girl. We had talked about that before we'd ever gotten married. And she came to live at our home. She was a little baby of 17 days, beautiful little girl, just a gorgeous little girl. And I thought it would be nice for Barbara to have a daughter. Had no idea what daughters did to their dads. And I'll tell you what, that little girl just stripped me raw. She just took my heart. She was the center of my universe. And I just loved her so much. And she had grown up in our home, and when she was 17 years old, as a senior in high school, she ran away from home. And I didn't see it coming. Neither did Barbara. And I don't know if I'd have seen it if I hadn't been an alcoholic or not. See, I had a problem with this alcoholism stuff because I didn't drink every night. I rarely ever drank in the mornings. Rarely ever did that. I knew that all you alcoholics did that all the time. And then I knew that alcoholics would go on 3-day to 3-week binges and stay drunk. I couldn't do that. I didn't get drunk every weekend. I wasn't having a lot of legal problems at that point in time, and I wasn't having marital problems. I wasn't beating or abusing my wife or kids. So there was just no way I could be an alcoholic. I had thought about this from time to time. I had very carefully set up and devised certain tests. Now, because I devised them and designed them, I passed them all. So I was very clearly certain that I was not an alcoholic and wasn't going to be one. But I don't know, as I look back, if I had not been drinking, if I'd have seen what was going on in the family. I don't know. I think those things happen in non-alcoholic families also. But at any rate, she ran away from home. I had gone to Chicago to take a special written test to become a captain, which I had put off for about 2 years. Now that later formed the basis for extreme self-pity and martyrdom, because I had done that so that I would be at home with this last child. I wouldn't be a junior captain gone all the time. So I had made this sacrifice for her. And when I called home from Chicago, ready to come home the next day, Barbara answered the phone, and all she said was hello. And instantly I sensed something was wrong. And I forced her to tell me. And she said, Don ran away yesterday. She and or some of her friends came into the house when I had taken you to the airport, got what they wanted, and left a note. And Barbara had been left with that all night the night before. I blurted out, I couldn't believe this, and I blurted out panicked instructions about where to go, where to look, who to call, who to contact. And I jumped on the airplane, and I was home in just a little over 2 hours, coming back from Chicago to Atlanta. Now, in that 2 hours, everything changed for me. Everything changed. So I walked out to the front of the car, the airport, and I got in the car. And as we pulled away, I told Barbara, I said, okay, all of that is forgotten. Forget about that. And I informed Barbara that I hated this girl. I absolutely hated this girl for what she had just done to us, and to me in particular. And I said, never, ever will she be allowed to come home again. Never, ever for the rest of my life do I want to hear her name mentioned. And I went home and I informed the family of that. Inside of 2 days, I had cleared her living area. All the furniture was gone to Goodwill. Anything inside that house that was associated with her or bore her imprint was gone. I went to the bank, and I went to the safety deposit box, and I ripped up her adoption papers. I took $500 and went to an attorney and disowned her. And then I tried to annul the adoption and could not. And as I looked around and I assessed this, I thought to myself, Barbara's having some problems with this. She probably needs a therapist. I was okay. She was just struggling a little bit. So I had just plucked this guy's name out of the phone, out of the yellow pages, and by the luck of the draw, I got a good doctor. Just by the luck of the draw, I got a good doctor. We saw that man once a week for almost 2 solid years, But one of the things that blows me away is never once ever did the subject of alcohol or drinking come up. Not because I tried to hide it or disguise it or divert it or camouflage it or anything else. I had no fear of talking about alcohol or drinking because I wasn't an alcoholic, was convinced I wasn't. So it was a moot point. So I never tried to engineer any kind of discussion about it or away from it or anything. But I'm fascinated in the hindsight of thinking, why didn't that ever come up? Why didn't somebody ever talk about that? But we didn't. I didn't like talking about my daughter, and I remember one time he was talking to me about her. He knew more about me than anybody except Barbara by this time. And I looked at him and I made a statement to him that I had never consciously ever said, nor had I ever formed the thought, as far as I know. But he said something to me about my daughter, and I looked at him and I said, I'm going to tell you something, doctor. I would rather hate than hurt. And I can see him again as he stood there in front of me, and he said, Lyle, he said, you survived a childhood doing that, but he said, if you continue it now, it'll destroy you. And I didn't say anything to him, but I'll bet you anything he could read my mind. Because I stood there and I looked at him with all the arrogance I had, and I thought to myself, well, you may be a PhD family therapist, but I'm an airline pilot, and I'll do it my way. And that's exactly what I did, and he was so right. He did say to me, he said, every time you had one of these episodes in your family, he said the thing you were experiencing was abandonment and betrayal. And do you know, I had never labeled anything. I had never, ever labeled that. And the instant those words were out, I thought, that's exactly what I thought. That's exactly what I felt. I was abandoned and betrayed one more time. And he says, and now that happens with this girl, this person that you love more than anybody in the world just about. And it's going to require a heck of a lot of hatred and rage for you to cover that up. And I was willing to expend the effort, and I did. I drank hard and heavy over that, always alone in a hotel room someplace, just fueling the fire, stoking that hatred and that rage, keeping it white hot, right where I needed it to be. And it almost did me in. And that's where we were. That's where we were when I was arrested for this incident. Now, I'm not an alcoholic because Don ran away. I was an alcoholic a long time before that. I've worked in the field of alcoholism at a treatment center. I've looked and tried to pick when did I become alcoholic. I can't really peg it. But it was a long time before any of that ever took place. But that was my answer. Drink, drink, drink. Drink it away. Just drink it away. So I went into this treatment center. The family was already shredded. I never thought that would happen to me. That was the farthest thing from anything that I ever intended, was to have my family destroyed like that and to have me participate in that way. And yet here I was. That doctor said something to me one time that stung me pretty big. He said, you've tried all your life as hard as you know to be different from your parents, haven't you? And I said, yes, I have. And he said, and you've ended up with just about the same result, haven't you? And it stopped me in my tracks. And I said, yes. I went through a very intense period in that treatment center. Couldn't have been at a better place. The next morning after I had entered there with the clothes on my back, I walked out. It was a Saturday morning. It was a very slowed down routine for those of you who've been in treatment. You know that the weekends are relaxed a little bit more and slowed down. The patients liked it. I didn't. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't want anybody to know me there. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want anybody to know who I was or what I'd done. I wanted nothing to do with anybody. I didn't know how I'd gotten there or what I was doing there. And it was like I was on Mars someplace. And I walked outside, And this treatment center was only 5 minutes away from the Atlanta airport, and I did not know that. And a Boeing 727 took off, and I instantly turned to look at it, just like I always have and always will. And as I looked at it and I paused, the thought absolutely penetrated me: you'll never fly again, ever. And I began to get sick, and I turned away, and I started swallowing, and I walked away, turned my back. And I walked over, and there were some chairs sitting there in this recreation area, and I sat down. I was vaguely aware there was somebody off to my left. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. And the chairs were a couple of feet apart. And I hear this voice, and I don't know if he's talking to me or the birds or the trees or a rock or somebody else or what. But he says, you know, if I only had a month to live, this is where I'd want to be. Now, I'd only been there one night, and so I wasn't quite up to speed on that. And I didn't turn to him. I didn't want to talk to him, but I felt compelled to respond. I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, because every goddamn day here seems like a year." You know. I think he was flunking the one day at a time concept, but I had a very intense treatment experience in there. Within a couple of days, the media had it, and I was the lead story every news segment in Atlanta for 3 solid weeks. So now everybody knew. Everybody knew. And I became suicidal in there. I didn't think I had the capacity for that. The only time I thought about suicide was in Vietnam, when I had wrestled with the question of whether or not I would allow myself to be captured when I was shot down. And I was on both sides of the issue. I never firmly resolved that. And I went way past the romancing idea. I was in the execution part of suicide. And even to this day, a lot of my friends don't believe that. They thought I was kind of a tough guy, a little hard, and I had that reputation. But I can tell you I was very close to it, because I was hurting more than I thought any human being could possibly endure. It went way beyond any threshold I thought existed. And I wanted it to stop. I just wanted it to end, and I was willing to do whatever I had to. Someplace in that brief period of time, I had a God-given moment of clarity when I said, you know, your family will never survive this. They'll never get past this. And I began to think more about living than dying. I went through this process, and then shortly thereafter, inside the first week, I walked into group not intending to talk, not intending not to talk. But for some reason, they closed the door, and I began to talk about my daughter. I began to talk about my daughter. And I broke down, and I cried. And I had not even cried at my parents' funerals. And I sobbed. My heart was breaking, and it was the first time ever that I looked at the pain and I accepted it for what it was, and I took it honestly. And I cried, and I felt naked. I felt like I was sitting there with no clothes, and they could all see me. But it was one of the most important events that took place in my treatment, because I learned it had nothing to do with how tough I am or how tough I'm not. And I began to heal that day. And I got a hold of Barbara and had to write her a letter, because we had no phone calls or visitors. I said, get a hold of Dawn and tell her, let's put this family back together again. The treatment center said, that's such an impossible breakthrough, we'll let you have a day room if she'll come. She came up from Florida. The 2 doctors who had diagnosed me, the family therapist and the guy who had diagnosed me, heard about this, and they said, could we please come watch? We never thought this would occur. The family therapist had written it off as impossible, based on my inflexibility. And they were off to the side when I walked into that room that day. And I saw my daughter for the first time in 2 years. And I stopped and I looked at her. And I'd forgotten how little she was. I'd forgotten how little she was. And I walked over and I put my arms around her and told her how much I loved her instead of how much I hated her. And in her arms was a 5-month-old granddaughter. And I picked that little girl up, and she stole my heart just as quickly as my daughter had. And so I was only barely a week into treatment, and already the promises were starting to come true for me. And so we healed that relationship. I quickly began to get word of legal consequences. Now, in the first week, Northwest Airlines had fired me. It had been announced on TV. I had never watched TV. I wouldn't go near it. But it had been announced that the FAA had revoked all my licenses, and they should have. I'm a hardcore believer in acceptance of responsibility. That when we do what we did, we get what we got. And I don't know anybody in this program who has a level and quality of sobriety that I respect, admire, and desire, who believes that they're still a victim. And if you do, I feel very sorry for you. I really, truly do. Everything that happened to me was fair and appropriate. I had lost all my licenses. I lost my FAA medical certificate because of my diagnosis of alcoholism, and I was fired from a 22-year career, never to fly again. And within the first 30 days, we were broke. I'd grown up poor. We had accomplished a lot and acquired a lot, and it was gone in 30 days, and I was now back where I started. So a lot of things were happening. Then came the legal consequences. Nobody had known anything about that. And now I began to get word, and they're having to come tell me. North Dakota is charging you. Minnesota's charging you. And then they keep doubling the penalties. And finally they took me out. I went through 6 of these. Finally they took me out, and there was a doctor out there, and he said, you got to come down to the office. And he made me sit down. He said, the federal grand jury has just come in and indicted you. They're charging you with a federal felony offense. You're looking at 15 years in prison, a $250,000 fine, and an attorney is coming in Sunday and wants $50,000, which I didn't have. He says, I have to ask you if you're going to hurt yourself. And I said, no. I went back, and I don't remember the collapse, but I do remember lying on my floor all alone, crying, and saying, God, I can't do this anymore. I don't have anything left. I'm out. I just can't do it anymore. Please help me. And so I remember sleeping that night for the first time in a long time, when I'd just gotten the most horrific news of all. I got out of treatment, and I went up to Minnesota. I was arraigned. I was quickly in trial. I went through a 3-week trial up there, which is an indescribable experience if you haven't been through one. Indescribable. But I had an advantage over the other 2 because I was the alcoholic. I didn't have much sobriety, but I had enough. And I had worked hard in there. I had worked harder in there than I had to get my wings. I knew that my answers didn't work, and I prayed to God that there was something involved in this program that was going to be the answer for the rest of my life. And I invested every ounce of effort I had in it. I didn't understand a lot of it, but I made the attempt. And I could go to an AA meeting up there at night, and the other 2 couldn't. And at first I was really nervous because I'd walk in and they'd recognize me because I was all over television. And it'd take me a few minutes to settle in and understand that I'm in a safe place. And I never shared. I would just sit and I would take the energy that you gave me through the course of that meeting, and then I would go back and I would get through the next day in trial. We were quickly found guilty, as I knew we would be, and we went back a few months later for the sentencing. I'd been in treatment with a federal judge who told me a lot of things I didn't want to know. And he said, the sentencing is a charade. He said, you're going to talk, your lawyer's going to talk, and you may or may not have witnesses depending on the judge, but the sentence is set. So nothing you say or anything anybody else says has any effect or bearing whatsoever. And you need to know that. I said, okay. A day and a half before the sentencing, Barbara and I had just walked into the attorney's office. I wish I had time to talk to you about this attorney. It's a story unto itself, and it contains many miracles, and is about a man no one has ever heard anything about in the form of an attorney. I had an unbelievable relationship with this attorney. But he says to me, he says, I have to show you this letter. Came in an hour ago. The judge is going to up the ante. Sentencing guidelines were in effect at that time, and the minimum sentence was 12 months, maximum was 18 months. I knew I was going to get 18. I'd been the captain. He says the judge is going to up the ante, which he can do, and it's been leaked to the press. I went into sentencing that morning. I gave my personal effects to Barbara. I said, I don't think I'll be coming back. I think he'll have us led straight into custody. And when it was my turn to speak, I stood up, so scared that I didn't know what I was going to say even as I was standing. And my prayer had just simply been, God, please let me speak from the heart and get it out. Because I have this tight choking band around my chest and my throat. I have a hostile judge in front of me. I have a hostile jury to the side. I have the media back here sketching my pictures. This is not a good place for me. Please just let me talk about something from the heart. I remember talking about the fact that I was grateful. I was grateful for my sobriety. I was grateful for the things that had happened inside my family. And I accepted responsibility. I couldn't change what had happened yesterday, much less what had happened a few months earlier. And to everybody's shock, dismay, and surprise, this judge announced a sentence on me of 16 months, 2 months less under the guidelines than he could have. And nobody understood what was happening. But it was one of the miracles of this program. And I've since been told by other people in the legal field they've never heard of that happening from the bench. He also did something that surprised everyone, and he said, this is a complex legal case. It's the first time that anyone has ever been tried under this law. And he said, I know there are going to be appeals, and I will allow you three gentlemen to remain free until your appeals are exhausted. The other two chose to stay free. I said, no, I will go in now. The judge says to this day, he said, I've never had a defendant before or since do that, voluntarily go to prison when he could have stayed out on an appeal. But I had learned in here that I had to deal with life on life's terms, that nothing was going to stop the inevitable. And I told my kids, I said, I can't come out the back door until I walk in the front. And as scared as I was to go in the front, it had to be done, and I did it. So I spent 14 months in the prison system. I had 2 months good conduct time. Doesn't sound like a lot to some people. I had a guy come up to me after I'd spoken one time. He says, hey, man, shoot, 14 months? I did 18 years. I said, yeah, good for you. You win. I can tell you, 14 months is a long time for me. I didn't grow up to go to prison. That place is different. I don't talk about any of the stuff that went on in there. I had a lot of experiences. I usually make 2 comments about it and then move on. And that is that there are 2 groups of really, 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 really sick people in prison. The sickest group goes home every night. And every now and then somebody will come up and say, well, I'm a correctional officer. I'll go, well, if you're a member of this fellowship, obviously that doesn't apply to you. You know, you can't be involved in this 12-step process and have that be true about you. And if that doesn't make you feel better, then call your sponsor. I can't help you. The other thing is I made 12 cents an hour, and the thing that was worse, the worst thing about that was there was no 401k plan. I came out of there stripped of everything, never to fly again. The judge put sanctions on me that made it impossible I'd ever fly again. The most infamous pariah in commercial aviation. No way. I began to think about flying again, though. There was a thing that said before any dream can come true, there must first be a dream. I started checking into it, and the FAA said, if you want to fly again, you'll have to start all over again with a private license. I'd never had a private license. I came out of the Marine Corps with a commercial and an instrument, and not one of my friends thought it was possible. Not one of my friends thought it was possible to start literally from the ground up and go get all 4 licenses. I had learned in here to do everything one step at a time, one day at a time, one thing at a time. And I told Barbara, if I change my attitude, I mean, if I look at it now, it's impossible. It is impossible. But if I choke it down to those few things, I can do this. And so I did it. And 10 and a half months later, I had 4 licenses based on everything that I had learned in here. But I still had to fly to get the licenses, and that was $10,000 to $20,000. Not going to happen. I was making $6.75 an hour in a treatment center. I got a phone call and a letter the same night from a friend in Minnesota, a pilot. He said, I've got a flight school. I want you to come up here and live with me and go through my flight school free. I was under 3 years of supervised release with 13 conditions, and I had to coordinate with Georgia Department of Corrections, Minnesota Department of Corrections, and I went up there, and in the summer of 1993, I flew, I spent 44 days up there. It was rained out 14 days. And I never relented. I was always studying those 14 days. I flew 78 hours in 30 days, and I got 4 licenses back, 2 of them in one day. I don't think that had ever been done before. I came home, and I had these licenses, but so what? Who's going to hire me to fly? And my thought was, if I can find a place in Africa that has no TV, maybe I can fly some sheep and cattle for $5 an hour and a can of soup at the end of the day. The licenses actually arrived about 3 months later. And on the very night they arrived, I got a phone call from the head of the pilot union at Northwest. I had never challenged my firing. I believed that they were right to fire me. A grievance had been filed automatically, but I had never activated that. They didn't fire me for being an alcoholic. They fired me for what I did, and that was fair. This guy says to me, "This is the best phone call I have ever made, because 3 hours ago, John Dasberg, the president and CEO of Northwest Airlines, personally reinstated you to full flight status." I couldn't believe it. It was stunning. It stopped me in my tracks, and the tears came, and I couldn't stop them either, and I didn't try. I couldn't believe that they were taking me back. I can't believe the courage of a man who would take that kind of risk on an alcoholic of my public record, having gone to prison, and he was willing to risk his career by taking another chance on me. And to this day, I don't know why he did it, and he and I have become pretty good friends. I went back to Northwest and signed an agreement November the 1st of 1993, never to be a captain again, and I didn't care. All I did was try to stay sober. All I did was try to set an example, because I was the most visible recovering alcoholic on the property at Northwest Airlines, who now had an alcohol program because they had gotten kicked so bad over my publicity. And I was part of that program and that process. But the miracles in this program are limitless, and every time I think I'll never see another one, it can't possibly occur. Nothing will ever go higher than the one I've just experienced. It comes. And Barbara and I were in a hotel one night. I had just spoken at United. I get another phone call from this man, same man, no longer head of the pilot union. He said, "John Dasberg just contacted me. He thinks you need to be a 747 captain." So I went back, and I checked out, and I spent my last 4 years as a 747 captain at Northwest Airlines, completely, fully restored, overwhelmingly welcomed back. There'll always be some that don't want us to get up. I feel sorry for them, but they're entitled to that. Very few. And I was overwhelmingly welcomed back. As I retired at the mandatory retirement age of 60 in 1998, I received a phone call from my attorney. He said, "I've just been contacted by the judge. The judge says he has never, ever, in 16 years, ever supported a petition for pardon on anyone. But if you want to make the attempt, he will support yours." In January of 99, I sent off to the pardons attorney. I got all the paperwork, a huge stack of it. Dotted the I's, crossed the T's. This judge put in a 3-page affidavit that's one of the most emotionally stirring piece of documents I've ever read. I cannot read it, and I've read it many times. I can't read it from page 1 to page 3 without tearing up. I can't believe the things this man says about me. And I've had no power over that. I've had no control over that. 2 years later, I walk in, and there are 8 phone messages saying, "You have just received a presidential pardon." The second day I was in treatment, the first full day I was in treatment, I was at an outside AA meeting, and I was listening to him read the promises with my head down, naturally, never looking up. And I wanted to believe those promises. And I hung on until they got to the point that says, no matter how far down the scale we've gone, we'll see our experience can benefit others. And I tuned it out. No way, because I was going too far down. That might apply to you, but it was not going to apply to me. It couldn't. And I just barely heard what was read after that. I just tuned it out. And I've had this amazing journey within the confines as a result of the power of this program. I have to do a lot of I and me in this story. It's not about I and me. It never was about I and me. I drew the attention because I was at the center of it. That everything that has taken place as a result of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous and some outside, and the things that I have learned in here and tried to do one day at a time. And that's it. That is the simple truth. I've talked for 72 minutes. That's longer than I wanted, but I wanted to get the story out. I thank you for having me here. Again, please accept my apology for having to leave tomorrow morning. God bless you, and you guys have a great weekend.